Greetings. So, my Serbian film videos seem to be very popular, so I'm guessing that perhaps the people who actually watch my YouTube channel want me to talk more about horror movies, though the Scream 4 video wasn't very popular, so I don't know. Well, anyway, I thought I would make a video about Lucky McKee's The Woman, since it just came out on Blu-Ray in England, and the Blu-ray, thankfully, is region-free, which is pretty cool considering the film is still in a very limited release here in the US in theaters. It played at a few film festivals, and now it's in a very limited release. It probably won't be out on DVD and Blu-ray in the US until January, so this was a chance to get to see it a bit early since it's not playing at any theaters near me. England. Why are your Blu-ray cases so thick? The only other time I ever bought a Blu-ray from England was All the Boys Love Mandy Lane, a film which still has not gotten a theatrical release or even a video release in the US, even though it's a US film. The filmmaker, the director who made that film, has since gone on to make two films that have gotten releases, The Whackness and the recent 50/50. So I ended up buying that from on a Blu-ray from England, and even though the film is region-free, All the Boys Love Mandy Lane I'm speaking about now, there's one extra on that disc, and the extra will not play on a Region 1 player. Go figure. Anyway, I bought this from Amazon.co.uk, and recently, well, I don't know if it's recently, but I just noticed that that site will tell you on the front page of the product if it's region-free, right next to the title and the year. So that's pretty cool. Sadly, a film that I've been dying to see, it's an Australian or New Zealand film, I forget which, called The Loved Ones, is not region-free, and it still has not been released in the US, and it's region-locked in every other country it's been released on, including Australia, New Zealand, Germany, and France. There was a recent Blu-ray release in France, though there's no word on whether it's region-locked yet or not. Oh, also, Darren Lynn Bousman's Mother's Day just came out in England, and that film has no theatrical release in the US either, though Amazon.co.uk does not say that it is region-free, so I'm assuming it's region-locked. Anyway, about the disc itself, before I go into the film, the film is region-free, I can confirm that. The special features, almost all of them will play in a Region A player. The Making of the Woman works in my Region A PS3. The deleted scenes work. Meet the Makers does not. The short film Me Burrow works. The music track works. The film Fright Fest Total Film Panel does not, and that one I was upset about because I think that would probably be a pretty decent extra. It was rated 18 by the BBFC. I checked the BBFC's website before I bought it, and it said it was passed with no cuts made, so I'm assuming this is the same as the R-rated cut that would be in the US. As far as the other specs, the picture is great on it. Something I did notice about the audio, the dialogue is very low on this film as compared to the sound effects and the music. I don't know if that's just my own TV or if that's something about the disc itself, but maybe they should have brought up the dialogue audio. I found that I had to turn up the volume on my television during some of the dialogue scenes and then turn it back down when people started screaming and bleeding. So that's that, but yeah, it was pretty cool. I was able to buy this so early from England thanks to it being region-free. Good job for Revolver. They also released the UK release of a Serbian film, which even though it was very cut, it also happens to be a region-free disc, so thanks Revolver for not putting on regional encoding. About the film itself. Lucky McKee wrote and directed this film. He previously has made a few different films that are pretty interesting. His first film was May, with Angela Bettis in the lead. She also plays a role in this film. May is an excellent film, probably one of the best films of the 2000s. It's a very heart-wrenching film. It's been described as sort of a feminist horror film. I'm not sure if I would also classify it that way, but it certainly has some rich female characters. I forget what year it came out, but I did rank it as the best film of that year when I did my little annual 10 best films of the year list, which nobody pays attention to. I used to just post it on my blog way back when. But an excellent film. Even Roger Ebert gave it 4 stars, and Roger Ebert doesn't normally give positive reviews to gory horror films. Though actually, May isn't really a horror film up until the last half hour. The first 2/3 of it are just sort of a dramedy. Lucky McKee followed that up with a movie called The Woods. That was a film that was sort of tampered with in post-production by the studio, as far as I know. So I'm not sure how much the finished film is reflective of McKee's vision. The film, I've only watched that film once, and I remember liking parts of it. That parts of it were endearing to me, but that ultimately the film wasn't much of a success. Then McKee did an episode of Masters of Horror entitled Sick Girl. Angela Bettis was also in that, along with Misty Monday, the lesbian softcore porn star, Misty Monday. That was quite good. And then The Woman is based on a novel that McKee co-wrote with Jack Ketchum. And previously, McKee also directed an adaptation of Ketchum's novel Red. Apparently, there was some behind-the-scenes drama on that film as well, and McKee was replaced as director, and so another director came in and shot some other scenes, and so the finished film has 2 credited directors. So you can't really judge that film as being McKee's vision either, though I haven't seen that film. Jack Ketchum is an interesting author. I've read a handful of his books. By and large, he's a horror writer mostly, but he largely stays away from supernatural elements in his books. He mainly writes about just sort of the evil of humanity, whether it's serial killers or people who are abusing children or whatever. And I think in that way it sort of makes his books more disturbing than if they were ghosts and goblins or whatnot. Ketchum has written a couple books about just sort of feral human beings who live in the woods and kill tourists and hikers. The first was Off Season, and then that was followed by Offspring. I read Off Season. It's not one of the better books of Ketchum's, in my opinion. Personally, I really liked his book Red. I really liked The Lost, and I really liked The Girl Next Door. Though the film adaptations have been made of some of those books. And they're not all that good. They've basically been a lot of cheap direct-to-video horror adaptations of his novels. The Girl Next Door and The Lost could have made good films, but the films that were made, they just seemed like low-rent direct-to-video horror, unfortunately. I know there was a film adaptation of Offspring, but I didn't see that, and I haven't read Offspring either, just Off Season. And so supposedly The Woman is like the third in that trilogy of Off Season and Offspring. Though there was also a short story that tied in with that universe that was also combined with one of the novels I read in the same edition. I have not read the book that The Woman is based on. I bought an autographed hardcover special edition from a site called Cemetery Dance. If any of you have bought any Stephen King editions or whatever from Cemetery Dance, they are extremely fucking slow when it comes to actually getting the books ready and shipping them out. You often have to wait over a year. I bought the hardcover autographed edition of The Woman back in February, still has not shipped. Supposedly, I think Ketchum has already done his signing, and they're waiting for McKee to sign all of his, so who knows when the fuck I'll ever get that. But anyway, because I really love the film May, that is why I really wanted to see this. And it's gotten some interesting reviews so far. It premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, and there was a pretty famous video now of, at the end of that film, this guy who was really offended by it stood up and was like, "How dare you make this? The film should be burned," and all this other stuff. I'd hate to see what that guy thought of a Serbian film, but sort of has really visceral reactions to this film, which, I mean, there are some very disturbing elements, especially toward the end, but I don't understand why people, especially people are sort of attacking this film as misogynist, which I do not see at all. And I would just wonder, have the people seen films like Baissez Moi or Irreversible? Or what do they think about movies like The Accused? You know, there was a woman on Twitter who was having a debate back and forth with McKee, and I guess she argued that any film that shows women being, raped or abused is automatically misogynist or anti-woman, which is sort of odd considering McKee is often considered to be a feminist. I think him and Joss Whedon are the only male filmmakers who are considered feminists, though I'm not sure if that label actually fits them. Some people have found it to be problematic, especially with Whedon, considering a lot of the women in his stories, his shows, Firefly and Buffy, whatever, always happen to be exceedingly attractive and thin. Though Christina Hendricks was on Firefly for 2 episodes, and she's rather curvy, and the woman, one of the women in Dollhouse, seemed a little curvy as well. What was the name of her character? I mean, her character had a couple of other. Her character had like 3 different names because she was a doll, but yeah, maybe I want to say Melanie, but the name escapes me. But regardless, it has nothing to do with the woman. It's just a little aside. So the film is basically about a family, sort of this nuclear family. It's sort of a very 50s sort of family. Husband, wife, 2 daughters, 1 son. And the father is very overbearing. He is emotionally abusive. He's physically abusive to his wife. And he may or may not be sexually abusive to his children. The film doesn't quite answer that question. In fact, one of my main complaint with this film is that I wanted to have a little bit more backstory on the family. Like, what is the extent of the abuse before the events of this film transpire? I actually tweeted Lucky McKee asking him that, but he didn't respond. He probably gets a lot of questions anyway. And then the father is hunting in the woods one day, and he spots upon this sort of feral woman bathing and feeding in a stream, and he kidnaps her and brings her home with the ostensible goal of quote-unquote civilizing this woman through, hanging her up in the barn and trying to get her to eat like a person and dress like a normal human being. That's about as much as I'll say about the plot without going into spoilers. I do not believe the film is misogynist, because the film never endorses what the father or what his son are doing. You are meant to think it's horrible and upsetting, and even though some bad things happen to this woman and the other female characters in the film, you are always sympathizing with them. Even the feral woman, who also will scare you, you're still sympathizing with them, and you do not sympathize with the male characters at all. The film is definitely it's not in a completely objective point of view, but it's certainly not taking the abuser's point of view. Maybe people are just sort of upset that the film is sort of, I wouldn't say the film is shot colorful, but it is very bright. And the music and sort of the out in the broad daylight visual style are sort of at an ironic counterpoint to the subject matter of the film. If I had to compare this to another film stylistically, it reminded me a lot of Todd Solondz's Happiness, another film that had very dark subject matter but was shot sort of very bright, and that film was maybe a bit more colorful. And also, this film has a very 1950s feel to the look of it. It does take place in modern times because there is a scene where a character is using a laptop, but otherwise you wouldn't know when this is taking place. It could easily be, the 50s or the 70s or the 80s or whatever. It's sort of timeless in that, though there is sort of a 50s feel to the scenes with the family. And yeah, the music is very sort of, I wouldn't say chipper, but it is a bit more uplifting, maybe. Well, uplifting is the wrong word too, but it's more, the tempo is more upbeat than you would expect in a film like this. So it is very ironic there. Oh, by the way, the sound design in this film is incredible. The sound effects, the sound design, the way sound is used, it is just excellent. I would also compare the visual style to some of the parts of Blue Velvet, the parts that take place in the town itself. What was the name of that town in that film? Lumberton, I think? Something like that. But it's sort of similar to Lynch's Blue Velvet in that sense. Sort of, you get this sort of iconic 1950s nuclear family type look to it, and then you have everything that's going on under the surface. So a lot of the controversy with this film is sort of what is the film saying? What is the message of this film, if it has one? Is it is it misogynist because it depicts the abuse of women? Is it feminist because none of the male characters are sympathetic and all of the women characters are? Is it misogynist because you could argue that the wife character played by Angela Bettis, or the mother of the family, because she waits so long to take a stand against her husband or help the woman, that perhaps that is a negative portrayal of her. Though you could argue as to whether or not she's punished for that later in the film. When I was watching it, gender seems to be the main issue that people take up with the film, what the film is saying about gender issues. But I also was thinking about cultural issues during this film, where you basically have the quote-unquote civilized, normal family who are taking in this animalistic feral woman and trying to civilize or modernize her, and how that could possibly be an allegory for, the United States or other Western countries going into third world countries like Vietnam or Iraq or Afghanistan and attempting to impose our lifestyle on them. And in fact, seeing the woman strung up in the barn sort of has some shades of Abu Ghraib photos and stuff like that. So perhaps the film is saying something about culture. Of course, to say that would be to imply that the filmmakers have a liberal bent. Honestly, I don't know what the politics of McKee or Ketchum are. I'm assuming McKee is somewhat liberal given his positive portrayal of homosexuals in his film. In one of the deleted scenes, you see that there's a character of a teacher in this film, a female teacher, who is concerned about the oldest daughter in the family. And one of the deleted scenes reveals that character is a lesbian, though that was cut out of the film. And the two main female characters of McKee's Masters of Horror episode, Sick Girl, are also, if not either lesbians or bisexuals, but they're depicted as lesbians, and it's a very positive portrayal there. Also there's some lesbianism in May. The main character of May seems to be... Well, I wouldn't give her a label as far as her sexual orientation. She just seems desperate to be loved. Though the Anna Faris character in that film is a lesbian. So just the fact that he consistently has... Well, I wouldn't say the Anna Faris character is a positive portrayal, but in general, he does have positive portrayals of homosexuals in his work, and so just based on that, I would assume he's a liberal. Ketchum, I haven't read it, but he has a book called Right to Life, which deals with sort of abortion issues. And he seems to come out pro-choice in that, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm assuming Ketchum might also be liberal. But to be honest, I have no clue as far as what Ketchum's politics are. So perhaps I'm just imbuing my own liberal politics on the film by making that distinction of the film being a metaphor for U.S. foreign relations. But maybe I'm going a bit too far there. But it was something that I thought about while I was watching the film. As far as what it's saying about gender. Well, I would be careful about saying that just because there are two men who are depicted horribly that the film would be sort of feminist or anti-man. Perhaps it does say something about patriarchy in our society, though I think it'd be sort of a stretch there. Honestly, the torment of the film, or the torment that the woman goes through in the film, I will say it's disturbing, but it is depicted tastefully, so, I hate the phrase torture porn, quote-unquote, because porn by its nature always argues in favor of what it's depicting, and a lot of the films that people label as torture porn, like Hostel, aren't endorsing violence or anything. Saw is a little bit different because to some extent the audience kind of is on the side of Jigsaw, but for the most part, I prefer the term torture horror because they're horror films in which instead of the fear of death, which is the drive of a lot of horror films, torture horror is the fear of prolonged agony and pain being inflicted upon you. And so I think torture horror is a more accurate label. I guess The Woman could fit into the label of torture horror, but I wouldn't call it torture porn. In fact, the only recent film that I would label as torture porn is The Passion of the Christ, because the entire movie has no plot and no character development. It's just a man being beaten to death for 2 hours, and you're supposed to be thinking that him being beaten to death is a good thing, because if you're a Christian, you believe this man, died for your sins or whatever. I'm an atheist, so fuck them. But because you're meant to sort of have a catharsis or a positive experience watching this man tortured, I would think The Passion of the Christ is torture porn. and maybe that film Captivity, but I fell asleep during it because it sucked, the Alicia Cuthbert Roll Joffe film. But yeah, I would say that the violence, or at least the depiction of violence, particularly against women, or at least I'll say sexualized violence, is depicted tastefully. It's not depicted in a way that would be arousing or titillating. You're never going to be. I think that's why the BBFC passed it with no cuts. I mean, you're clearly not on the side of the tormentor, of the rapist or the torturer in this film. Though when the shit hits the fan later in the film, it does get quite violent, though that violence, it may be a bit over the top, you could claim, but in that time it's largely women doing violence against its sort of revenge. Yeah, this film doesn't quite fit into the structure of the quote-unquote rape revenge film, like Last House on the Left or I Spit on Your Grave. Technically, someone is raped, and technically they do take revenge, but it doesn't really fit the normal structure of that. The problem with saying the film is feminist is simply that the woman, or the feral woman, the main character there, even though she is tortured, even though she is abused, the audience is still going to be frightened of her. She's still feral and animalistic, and you could argue that one of her victims does not deserve her fate. And there's also a turn at the end where a certain character goes along with the woman back into the woods, and you could argue that that's not a good thing, but then you could argue that compared to what that character has been going through earlier, it's sort of a better option for her to go with the woman. So she's not an entirely sympathetic character in that she's a strong character, you could say. She's abused, and yet she still is strong and ferocious, but is the film saying that the only way for a woman to be strong is to deny her humanity? So that's sort of problematic there. You could also argue that a couple of the positive female characters meets rather grisly ends, and so you could argue that perhaps the film is punishing them in some way. There's only really one character who gets out sorta unscathed, and I'm sure that after the events of the film that the film depicts, she would have rather large emotional scars. But I could go more into detail. I think I'm already going a little bit too much into spoiler territory, but saying that the film is feminist, I think sort of stretches things a bit. But it's certainly not misogynist. It's still a very good film. It's very well made, very well acted. The sound design is incredible. I do like this sort of ironic visual style of it. The violence is rather raw and disturbing toward the end. Maybe a bit too over the top, so that you might end up getting some nervous laughter in there. But ultimately, I definitely recommend it. Not nearly as good as May, but it's better than McKee's other films. And it's certainly the best adaptation of a Ketchum novel that I've seen so far. And yeah, the sort of the film possibly being an allegory for U.S. Intervention in other countries is something I picked up on, but I might be reading too much into the film. You can see the film and judge for yourself. But anyway, Amazon.co.uk had it for about £10. Once you factor in shipping and convert it into US dollars, it ended up being $18 and change. It's sort of odd is that I bought stuff from Canada before, and it was actually more expensive to ship things from Canada than it was from the UK, which is sort of odd. But yeah, it came out to about $18 overall, and if someone could explain to me the difference between a value-added tax and a sales tax, I'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks.